Hello students, welcome to readmedprep Academy channel. Today in Principles of Ecology part 4, we are going to talk about the ecological adaptations of plants. The modifications in the structure of organisms to survive successfully in an environment are called adaptations of organisms. Adaptations help the organisms to exist under the prevailing ecological habitat. Based on the habitats and the corresponding adaptations of the plant, they are classified into hydrophytes, xerophytes, mesophytes, epiphytes and halophytes. Let us discuss one by one. What are hydrophytes? The plants which are living in water or wet places are called hydrophytes. According to the relation to water and air, they are subdivided into free-floating hydrophytes, rooted floating hydrophytes, submerged floating hydrophytes, root submerged hydrophytes and amphibious hydrophytes. What are free floating hydrophytes? These plants float freely on the surface of water. They remain in contact with water and the air but not with the soil. Examples: Acornia, Pistia and Wolfia. Wolfia is the smallest flowering plant known. Here in this image you can see on the left side the Acornia plant with the floating leaves, the stolon having the fibrous roots inside the water and the roots having the root pockets. On the right side you can see the Pistia plant with the lamina with the inflated petiole arising from the offset, and below the offset are the fibrous roots having the root pockets. Below is the image of Wolfia plant. What are rooted floating hydrophytes? In these plants the roots are fixed in the mud, but their leaves and flowers are floating on the surface of the water. These plants are in contact with the soil, water and air. Example: Nelumbo, Nymphaea, Potamogeton and Marsilia. The lotus seeds show highest longevity in the plant kingdom. Here in this image on the left side you can see the Nymphaea plant, which is a rooted floating hydrophyte having the flower above the water level, the lamina or the leaf and a long petiole. You can see the flower bud inside the water, and the plant is fixed to the soil by a rhizome and the roots. On the right side you can see Marsilia, where the leaflets are emerging above the water surface and small leaves arising in the water, and they are fixed to the mud by the rhizome and the roots. Here in this image in the upper part you can see the Nelumbo nucifera with the floating leaves. In the lower image you can see Potamogeton nodosus. What are submerged floating hydrophytes? These plants are completely submerged in water. They are not in contact with the soil and air. Example: Ceratophyllum and Utricularia. In this image you can see the submerged floating hydrophyte Ceratophyllum on the left side, where below the water level the plant is present with the stem and large number of submerged leaves at the nodes. On the right side you can see the floating leaves and stems of Utricularia. What are rooted submerged hydrophytes? These plants are completely submerged in water and rooted in the soil. They are not in contact with air. Example: Hydrilla, Vallisneria and Isoids. In the image on the left side you can see the rooted submerged hydrophyte Vallisneria with the long ribbon shaped leaves, and the male flowers are being released inside the water which come to the surface. The female flowers are seen floating on the surface of water, and these male flowers cause pollination of the female flowers, and the plant is fixed to the soil by the stolon and the roots. In the middle image you can see the hydrilla, where the flower is seen, the whorls of submerged leaves are seen, and the stolon is seen fixed to the soil. In the right side image you can see the Isoid species fixed to the mud with the ribbon shaped leaves. What are amphibious hydrophytes? Rooted emergent hydrophytes. These plants are adapted to both aquatic and terrestrial modes of life. They grow in shallow water. Example: Ranunculus, Typha and Sagittaria. In this image on the left side you can see the Sagittaria with the flowers emerging above the surface of the water and the emergent leaves above the surface of the water, and the submerged leaves are present within the water, and the plant is fixed to the soil or the mud by the stolon and the roots. On the right side, you can see the ranunculus with the flowers emerging outside the surface of the water and the emergent aerial leaves which are very small, and below you can see the submerged dissected leaves in the water, and the plant is fixed to the soil by the roots. Here in this image you can see Typha latifolia inside the water. What are hydrophytes? The plants which grow in moist, damp and shady places are called hydrophytes. Example, Habernaria, which is an orchid, and mosses, which is a bryophyte, etc. In this image, in the above, you can see the Habernaria repens, which is otherwise called the water spider orchid. In the lower image, you can see the mosses, which is a bryophyte, grown on the damp, moist wall. What are the morphological adaptations of hydrophytes? In the roots are totally absent. Example, in Wolfia and Salvinia. You can see the image on the left side, which is Wolfia, which does not have roots, and the leaves float on the surface. On the right side, you can see the leaves of Salvia floating on the surface. Sometimes the roots are poorly developed in Hydrilla. You can see the image on the left side. In the right side, you can see in the image in ranunculus, the roots are well developed. The root caps are replaced by root pockets. Example, Acornia. You can see in the image below where the lamina present at the end of the inflated petiole, which is attached to the offset. Below the offset are the fibrous roots, and roots have root pockets. What are the adaptations in the hydrophyte stem? The stem is long, slender, spongy and flexible in submerged forms. In free floating forms, the stem is thick, short, stoloniferous and spongy, and in rooted floating forms it is a rhizome. Vegetative propagation is through runners, stolon, stem and root cuttings, tubers, dormant apices and offsets. What are the adaptations in hydrophyte leaves? The leaves are thin, long and ribbon shaped as seen in Vallisneria in the image below on the left side, and sometimes they are linear as seen in the image in the middle of Potamogeton. On the right side you can see Ceratophyllum, where the leaves are finely dissected. The leaves may be floating, large and flat. You can see in the image on the left side of Nymphaea, and on the right side you can see the leaves of Nelumbo. In Acornia, the petioles become swollen and spongy. Similarly, in Trapa also you can see the petioles become swollen and spongy. They have air pockets so that the plant can float easily on the surface of the water. In emergent forms, the leaves show heterophyly. Submerged leaves are dissected and aerial leaves are entire. Example, ranunculus, Limnophila, heterophylla and Sagittaria. In this image, in the above, you can see heterophyly seen in ranunculus, where the leaves below submerged in the water are fine, thin and free floating. Leaves that are above the surface of the water are larger and are dissected. In the image below on the left side, you can see the leaves of Limnophila heterophyllae is seen, where the leaves which are submerged are thin, dissected and fine and freely floating, whereas the leaves you can see are larger, which are present above the surface of the water. In the image on the right side, you can see a Sagittaria plant with the leaves that are emerging are larger and the leaves that are present within the water are smaller. What are the anatomical adaptations of hydrophytes? Cuticle is either completely absent or if present, it is thin and poorly developed. Single layer of epidermis is present. Cortex is well developed with parenchyma. Vascular tissues are poorly developed. In emergent forms, vascular elements are well developed. Mechanical tissues are generally absent except in some emergent forms. Pith cells that are present are sclerenchymatous. Here in this image, you can see the transverse section of hydrilla stem, where the cuticle is absent, epidermis is thin and the hypodermis is present below the epidermis. Below the hypodermis is the cortex, which consists of the parenchyma. Below the cortex is the layer of endodermis. Below the endodermis is the pericycle. Within the pericycle, in the center is the xylem cavity, and surrounding the xylem cavity are the sieve tubes and parenchyma forming the phloem. What are the physiological adaptations of hydrophytes? Hydrophytes have the ability to withstand anaerobic conditions. They possess special aerating organs. Now let us move on to xerophytes. The plants which are living in the dry or xeric conditions are known as xerophytes. Xerophytic habitat can be of two different types. They are physical dryness and physiological dryness. Physical dryness, in these habitats, soil has very small amount of water due to the inability of the soil to hold water because of low rainfall. In physiological dryness, in these habitats, water is sufficiently present, but plants are unable to absorb the water because of the absence of the capillary spaces. Example, plants in salty and acidic soil. Based on the adaptive characters of the xerophytes, xerophytes are classified into three categories: ephemerals, succulents, and non-succulent plants. Ephemerals, these are also called drought escapers or drought evaders. These plants complete their life cycle within a short period of time or a single season. These are not true xerophytes. Example, argemone, mollugo, tribulus, and tephrosia. Here in this image, in the above, you can see the ephemerals like argemone mexicana. In the image below, it is mollugo verticillata. In this slide, the above image, you can see tribulus terrestris, and in the lower image you can see Tephrosia purpurea. Now, what are succulents? These are called drought enduring plants. These plants store water in their plant parts during the dry period. These plants develop certain adaptive characters to resist extreme drought conditions. Example, Opuntia, aloe, bryophyllum, and begonia. Here in this slide you can see the plant Opuntia on the left side, and you can see the plant of aloe on the right side with the rhizome, the roots, and the succulent leaves, and the leaves having marginal spines. This image on the above you can see the bryophyllum, and the image below you can see the begonia leaves. Now, what are non-succulents? These are also called drought resistant plants. They are the true xerophytes. They face both external and internal dryness. They have many adaptations to resist dry conditions. Example, Casuarina, Nerium, Ziziphus, and Acacia. The above image shows Casuarina plant and the below image shows the Nerium plant. In this image on the left side you can see the Ziziphus plant, which is non-succulent perennial, which has stipular spines and the leaves. On the right side image, you can see the acacia tree in the desert. What are the morphological adaptations of xerophytes in the roots? The root system is well developed and is greater than the shoot system because it has to absorb large amount of water for the plants, and it grows in all directions. In order to anchor the plant in the sandy soil against the wind, it helps to maximize the water uptake. Root hairs and root caps are also well developed. In xerophytic plants with the leaves and the stem are covered with hairs are called Trichophyllus plants. Example, cucurbits, Melothria, and Muckia. In this slide, in the above image you can see the cucurbits Melothria scabra, and the below image you can see the Muckia madrasapatana, otherwise called Madrasi pumpkin. What are the xerophytic adaptations in the stem? Stems are mostly hard and woody. They may be aerial or underground. The stems and leaves are covered with wax coating or covered with dense hairs. In some xerophytes, all the internodes in the stem are modified into fleshy leaf structures called phylloclads. Example, Opuntia. Here in this image on the left side, you can see a succulent xerophyte phylloclad Opuntia, where you have the spines present on the modified stem, which is called the phylloclad. On the right side, you can see in the image non-succulent xerophyte perennial Caparis, where it has a stem which is modified with the stipular spines. In some of the others, single or occasionally two internodes modified into fleshy green structures called cladode. Example, asparagus. In the image on the right side, you can see the stem with the spines and large number of scale leaves around the nodes, and in between the internodes the stem is modified as a cladode. In some, the petiole is modified into a fleshy leaf like structure called the phyllodes. Example, Acacia Melanocylon. In the image on the right side you can see the gradual development of phyllodes in acacia. Initially a small projection occurs with small leaves. Slowly these leaves slowly begin to disappear and the petiole develops into a larger structure, and the petiole gets modified itself into performing the function of photosynthesis and forms the fill load. What are the xerophytic adaptations in leaves? Leaves are generally leathery and shiny to reflect light and heat. In some plants like Euphorbia, Acacia, Xerophytes and Capparis, the stipules are modified into spines. Here in this image on the left side, you can see the plant Euphorbia with large number of spines at the nodes and the internodes. And the image on the right side below, you can see the long and large spines of Acacia plant. The image above shows the spine in Xerophytes plant, and in the image below you can see the plant Capparis with the modified spines. The entire leaves are sometimes modified into spines. Example, Opuntia, you can see in the image below on the left side. Or it may be reduced to scales in asparagus, as you can see in the image below on the right side. What are the anatomical adaptations of xerophytes? Presence of multi-layered epidermis with heavy cuticle to prevent water loss due to transpiration. Hypodermis is well developed with sclerenchymatous tissues. Sunken shaped stomata are present only in the lower epidermis with hairs in the sunken pits. Scotoactive type of stomata, that means the stomata opens during the night and closes during the day, found in succulent plants to prevent water loss. Vascular bundles are well developed with several layered bundle sheath. Mesophyll is well differentiated into palisade and spongy parenchyma. In succulents, the stem possesses a water storage region. Here you can see a section of the nerium leaf which shows a thick cuticle. Below the thick cuticle is the multi-layered epidermis. Below the epidermis is the palisade parenchyma, below which is the spongy parenchyma. Then you can see the stomata surrounded by the God cells, and a pit or a cavity is present with large number of hairs called the trichomes. And the lower epidermis is present which has cuticle. In this you can see a succulent leaf of Peperomia, which is a transverse section, the lateral wing portion only, where it has a thick cuticle with the upper epidermis, water storage cells. Below the water storage cells is the palisade parenchyma, the spongy parenchyma, and below which is the lower epidermis. What are the physiological adaptations of xerophytes? Most of the physiological processes are designed to reduce transpiration. Life cycle is completed within a short period, ephemerals. Now, what are mesophytes? Plants which are living in moderate conditions, neither too wet nor too dry, are known as mesophytes. These are called common land plants. Example, maize and hibiscus. Here you can see a maize plant on the left side which has a tassel or the male inflorescence, the leaves attached to the stem, and a female inflorescence having the ear of the corn with the husk and the silk, and the roots are fixed to the ground, which is the fibrous root. On the right side you can see the hibiscus plant which has the stem and the leaves and the flower which has a taproot system. Now, what are the morphological adaptations of mesophytes? Root system is well developed with root caps and root hairs. Stems are generally aerial, stout and highly branched. Leaves are generally large, broad, thin with different shapes. What is the anatomical adaptations of mesophytes? Cuticle in aerial parts are moderately developed. Epidermis is well developed and the stomata are generally present on both the epidermis. Mesophyll is well differentiated into the palisade parenchyma and spongy parenchyma. Vascular and mechanical tissues are fairly developed and well differentiated. Here in this image you can see the transverse section of a mesophyte leaf which has the upper adaxial epidermis, below which is the palisade parenchyma, and large number of chloroplast is present in the palisade parenchyma as well as the spongy parenchyma, and below is the lower epidermis with the stomata. You can see a vascular bundle surrounded by a bundle sheath with the xylem and the phloem. What are the physiological adaptations of mesophytes? All physiological processes are normal. Temporary wilting takes place at room temperature when there is water scarcity. What are tropophytes? Tropophytes are plants which behave as xerophytes at summer and behave as mesophytes or hydrophytes during rainy season. Now let us move on to the epiphytes. Epiphytes are plants which grow perched on other plants or supporting plants. They use the supporting plants only as shelter and not for food or food supply, or not for water. These epiphytes are commonly seen in the tropical rainforest. Example, orchids, lianas, hanging mosses and money plant. What are the morphological adaptations of the root system? Root system is extensively developed. These roots may be of two types. They are clinging roots and aerial roots. Clinging roots fix the epiphytes firmly on the surface of the supporting objects. And aerial roots are green colored roots which may hang downwardly and absorb moisture from the atmosphere with the help of a spongy tissue called velamen. In this image you can see the roots in epiphytes. It has an aerial roots which hang in the atmosphere for the absorption of water vapor and some nutrients, and the clinging roots which fixes the plant to the supporting plant. Stem of some epiphytes are succulent and develop pseudobulb or tuber. You can see in the image on the left side. Generally, the leaves are lesser in number and may be fleshy and leathery. You can see in the image on the right side. Myrmecophily is a common occurrence in the epiphytic vegetation to prevent the predators. You can see in the image on the left side the myrmecophily. The fruits and seeds are very small and usually dispersed by wind, insects and birds. You can see in the image on the right side small seeds of epiphytes. What are the anatomical adaptations? It has a multi-layered epidermis. Inner to the velamen tissue, the peculiar exodermis layer is present. Presence of a thick cuticle and sunken stomata greatly reduces the transpiration. Succulent epiphytes contain well-developed parenchymal cells to store water. Here in this image, you can see the transverse section of an aerial root of orchid showing velamen tissue. The upper surface, which is the epidermis, and below the epidermis is the velamen tissue. Below the velamen tissue is the exodermis. Below the exodermis is the cortex. And you can see the endodermis. Inside the endodermis is the conjunctive tissue, and in between the conjunctive tissue you have the metaxylem and the protoxylem and the phloem, and in the center you have the pith. What are the physiological adaptations? Special absorption processes of water by velamen tissue is a very important physiological adaptation. Now let us move on to halophytes. There are special type of halophytic plants which grow on the soils with high concentration of salts. Example, Rhizophora, Soneratia and Avicennia. In this image on the left side you can see the Rhizophora, and the right side you can see the Soneratia. Halophytes are usually found near the seashores and estuaries. The soils are physically wet but physiologically dry. As plants cannot use salt water directly, they require filtration of salt using physiological processes. This vegetation is also known as mangrove forest, and the plants are called mangroves. What are the morphological adaptations of halophytes? The temperate halophytes are herbaceous, but the tropical halophytes are mostly bushy. In addition to the normal roots, many stilt roots are developed. A special type of negatively geotropic roots called pneumatophores with nematodes to get sufficient aeration are also present. They are called breathing roots. Example, Avicennia. Here in this image you can see the pneumatophores of the mangrove plant, where the main stem is present and large number of pneumatophores arise around the main trunk. And these pneumatophores or nematode or lenticel have multiple openings, and roots arise from below the nematodes of phores. Presence of thick cuticle on the aerial parts of the plant body. Leaves are thick, entire, succulent and glossy. Some species are aphyllous without leaves. In the image on the right side you can see a succulent halophyte, Acornia. Vivipary, when seeds or embryos begin to develop before they detach from the parent plant. This mode of seed germination is found in halophytes. You can see in the image on the right side the vivipary germination, where the seeds start germinating before they separate themselves from the mother plant, and when they fall on the ground they form the hypocotyle and develop into a new plant. What are the anatomical adaptations? Epidermal cells of stem is heavy, cutinized, almost squarish, and are filled with oil and tannins. Star-shaped scleriates and head-shaped heavy thickened spicules that provide mechanical strength to the cortex are present in the stem. Here in this image you can see the transverse section of stem of Rhizophora macronata, where it has an epidermis, the hypodermis, and in the cortex it has an outer cortex and the inner cortex which has spicules, tannin cells, lacunae and sclerites, and inside is the endodermis which contain large number of starch granules, and below that is the pericycle, and you have the vascular bundle with the phloem, cambium, the metaxylem and the protoxylem, and the oil containing cells and the spicules and the tannin cells. The leaves may be dorsiventral or isobilateral with salt secreting glands. In the image on the right side you can see the deposits of salt below the undersurface of the leaf. Below you can see the salt secreting gland which has a salt excreting pore in between the cuticle and a collecting cell which collects the salt to excrete. What are the physiological adaptations? High osmotic pressure exists in some plants. Seeds germinate in the fruits of mother plant itself, which is called vivipary, we discussed earlier. Out of the 3 districts of Tamil Nadu, Nagapattinam, Tanjavur and Tiruvarur, Muthupet, which is present in the Tiruvarur district, was less damaged by the Gaja cyclone in November 2018 due to the presence of the mangrove forest. So today in Principles of Ecology Part 4, we discussed about the ecological adaptations. Thank you. Kindly subscribe, like, share and comment the channel Read Medprep Academy. Log on to www.readmedprepacademy.com. Our Facebook ID is Read Medprep Academy. Our email is readmedprepacademy@gmail.com. Our Instagram is Read Medprep Academy. Kindly post your questions in the comment box. We will reply with appropriate answers. Thank you very much.